Perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone. It's great to have you here tonight for what is normally our monthly treasurers meeting, but this is kind of a special one. And we've done this once before, a couple of years ago, also by Rachel, who I'll introduce shortly. And um, and this particular occasion, we cast a wider net for people to attend because we know that in some clubs that this would be of interest to more than just the treasurer or perhaps somebody other than the treasurer. So I wanted to make sure that other people had an opportunity to take advantage of what we have tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who I think probably most of you on the call know Rachel Boyd, who is an assistant governor and the past president of the Bowmanville Club, and also the district's insurance specialist who works closely with me on managing our insurance relationship and on addressing sort of issues that arise with the insurance company that are sort of beyond my certainly beyond my level of expertise, not being an insurance professional myself. So we're very lucky to have Rachel with us, who's able to operate at that level on a peer-to-peer relationship with our insurance broker. And Rachel, welcome. Thank you for doing this once again after a couple of years absence, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Larry, do you want to share the presentation? Because I'll get right into it. So this is a very casual but hopefully informative session on what our insurance policy for the district covers. So yes, it's a district policy, but it does affect all of your clubs as well. I haven't done this presentation for 2 years, and I didn't even practice it again. I just changed the date. So bear with me. It is, please jump in as we go through it. But yeah, here we go. So insurance is fun. If anybody knows me, Larry has probably realized I like talking about insurance way too much. But it is really interesting, and it is important that we understand our coverages. So, do I have to tell you to move to? Yeah, next slide. Thanks, Larry. So these are some real pictures of an event. Ellie, you might recognize this, that you might have been here, I think, at this one. This is an event at Mossport that the Rotary Club of Bowmanville was at working. We did not cause this, but the whole point is that no event, nothing we do is without some form of risk. These pictures are from Mossport. Anyone that knows the Bowmanville Club knows that we've got a relationship with Mossport Racetrack, where some of the long weekends in the summer we volunteer and drive the golf carts around. We move the passengers around. So this was a mini tornado that came through. Just a couple of pics from it. Next slide, Larry. Okay, so no activity is without risk. How do we protect ourselves? These are some examples within our district or within Rotary where, things can go wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a disaster. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes there's coverage, sometimes there's not. But, we look at Whitby Club. Nisi, you'd be familiar with this. I believe it was their very first Rib Fest when they had that terrible lightning strike, sending 17 people to hospital.
Yeah, very first one.
Yeah, pretty crappy luck, I would say, for that, right? But all in all, you know what? Whitby's had Ribfest ever since then. Insurance policy was in place and responded. Bowmanville Club, only a couple of years later at a Ribfest, had a teen viciously beaten outside, some charges laid. Rotary Club was not brought into that, but we were investigated, had to answer some serious questions. There was no claim. But again, we were pretty, had some peace of mind knowing that we did have insurance in place. And then another claim with more of a slip and fall at a Rib Fest with another club. So things do get out of our control. It's important that we mitigate these, that we have insurance in place if these things do happen. Next slide. So how do we protect ourselves? There's different ways that we can transfer risk. We can transfer risk through insurance. That's the main way that we handle risk within the district. We have a very robust insurance policy. It's extremely broad, and I'm going to go into those. But we can do it through insurance, which we do. Or sometimes we ask for certificates of insurance from those that we work with. For example, our own Rotary Club, we have vendors that come to our club. We have a carnival that comes to our club that isn't insured. So what do? We make sure that that carnival provides us a certificate of insurance, and they add the Rotary Club of Bowmanville onto that. So we have some peace of mind, and we have a legal document that shows if something happens in the carnival that the Rotary Club is protected. What other ways do we do to protect ourselves besides insurance? We do things like loss control. We make sure everybody's smart surf trained. We've got some first aid there. We at RibFest, we hire security guards. So there's other ways to transfer risk. It's not always insurance. Loss control is a big part that we always have to think in the events that we do, big and small. And then again, kind of when I was saying certificates of insurance, but insurance from our vendors. So we make sure we have a lot of vendors at our events, especially our RibFest. So sometimes it makes sense
I believe it's
for
Radar
us.
Campbell. What do you need?
So we often end up having to buy insurance from them as well. So we've got vendors that'll say to us, we are renting all this equipment, often things like generators, things like that. It's much easier for us to pay that additional cost to buy the insurance from these vendors than it is often to add to our policy where it's the coverage maybe isn't quite as broad. And then there's deductibles and other things we need to take into consideration. But again, there's many ways that we can protect ourselves. It's not always insurance. I'm a good resource. If you tell me there's an event coming up and, we want to make sure that we're fully protected, what's the best ways? Here are many ways that we can do it. Next slide. So who isn't insured? I like to start with this because I think it gives people some peace of mind when they want to know this insurance policy. It lists a district. It lists the district. It includes, it's a very broad definition. It includes the Rotaractors, includes all the clubs. It includes some of the foundations with some caveats to it. It includes all members. It includes all volunteers. So we've got a very broad definition of insured. Next slide. I'm going to start with our general liability insurance. When we look at our own clubs, when we look at the districts and we try to establish where most of our claims are, I think most of us think, bodily injury, property damage. That's our main worry, probably bodily injury. So that's our general liability policy. And our general liability policy has a couple main sections, and I want to go through those with you. To start, we've got a 5 million limit. So that's a per incident limit. We have a 10 million aggregate. And what that means is in 1 year, we can have several different claims as long as they don't go over 10 million. So we can have 3 at 3 million, 2 at 5 million. Our main coverage would fall under the section A, which is our bodily injury property damage. And there's a small deductible on that. You'll see there, if you can see the slide, there is an abuse sublimit of 1 million. So it is common with nonprofits that they seek out abuse coverage if they deal with vulnerable people. So with the Rotary clubs, many of us deal with youth, some of us deal with seniors, some of us deal with a whole slew of people in our community that could fall under vulnerable, whether we're working with food banks, whether we're working with Rotary Club. We do a lot with special needs children. So we do have coverage up to $1 million. Personal injury and advertising. So what that means is personal injuries, I always say, is our hurt feelings. So our libel, slander would fall into there. Somebody says something misinterpreted or maybe out of turn. Our advertising liability, let's say that we do some posters up that either represent something incorrectly or offend somebody. We would find coverage there if we happen to ever get sued for that. Medical payments. Let's say that somebody that are one of our events, I'm going to keep saying RibFest because it's one that has a lot of different exposures. Maybe trips over a power cord that we've got out from the generator to a light or something, injures themselves. We accept that we maybe made some mistakes, could have done a little bit better. We don't want them to sue us, but we know that they do have some valid injuries that we want taken care of. We do have up to $50,000 coverage for this sort of situation that doesn't force us to ask these third parties to sue us to help them. So there is some coverage for that. These are situations where we accept liability, and I don't mean accept liability contractually. I just mean as a club, we talk about it and feel like, hey, I think we could have done better. I think we maybe should help this person out or reach out and look into these. So we do have up to 50,000 there. So those would be medical expenses. It could be something like having to go see a massage therapist, or maybe some renting a wheelchair or crutches, those sort of things. Tenants' legal liability coverage. Anytime we rent a space, if we're renting a space and we're a tenant, whether it's short-term or long-term, if we rent that space and the activities that we do cause damage to that, the landlord, in essence, could reach out to us for compensation. So let's say our club likes to rent the Bowmanville Older Adult Center. We have meetings there frequently. And let's say I'm doing some work in the kitchen. For whatever, I start a fire, the rest of the place burns down, or I leave the water running and there's flood damage. We have coverage for that under a general liability policy. So there is some coverage for that. And then we have other extensions such as non-owned auto. So basically someone in your club is using their own vehicle for Rotary work. Somebody, they have an accident. Somebody who sues the Rotary Club as well, because they say, well, I think had they not been doing work for the Rotary Club, then this accident might not have happened. Because they were doing work for the Rotary Club, we feel the Rotary Club shares some responsibility. The Rotary Club would then have coverage if the entity, the Rotary Club or the district is brought into that. So this is our basic general liability coverages. Larry, next slide, please. Any questions? It's going to be a lot of content. I'm trying to simplify it, but as we go through it, I'm hopefully going to answer some questions that might be in your minds already, but if not, write it down and we'll come back to it. So when I look at what are our main exposures under the general liability, when I look at, actual trends on where we see the claims, where's the volume, things that we would see typically under general liability policy, your main one is always going to be that one right in the middle, your slip and falls, your trip and fall. Not that we see a lot of them, but that's typically what is most common under a general liability policy. Food poisoning, alcohol poisoning, we don't see a lot of that, thankfully. But that's definitely something that we want to protect ourselves from. And then damage not in your care, custody, and control. So that would be, if we're damage. We're going to skip that one. Sorry, I don't have a good example right now, but we'll come back to this. Next slide, Larry. So we do have obvious exclusions. They are listed on our policy. If your club is involved in any of these, we need to talk, because these are not covered under the insurance policy. And it doesn't mean you can't do them, but it does mean we need to make sure we can get insurance in place through an event policy. So, we have an amusement park, we have a carnival. That's not covered under our policy. That is part of the reason that we make sure that they have insurance in place, and they list the Rotary Club of Bowmanville. Tobogganing. We had a club reach out 2 years ago. They wanted to do a big tobogganing event. We had to, put the kibosh on that unless we were going to explore an event policy. We can't do tobogganing events, not under this insurance. We cannot set off fireworks under this insurance. Stage rental. So we cannot rent a stage out unless, without getting a certificate of insurance, naming us as additional insured. We don't want any part of renting stages. Our stage out, we own a stage, or we help pay for a stage for our town. We can't rent that out without making sure that there's a certificate of insurance that names us. So I don't know how many of you guys actually own stages or not, but that's something that we have to be very conscious of. If you have a stage, if you lend it out, you want to make sure that you have a certificate of insurance naming your club. And there's some.
And Rachel, by the same token, if we're renting a stage, which is relatively common,
Yep.
The stage rental companies are almost accustomed to saying, here's the stage and here's our insurance, because
Absolutely.
this kind of exclusion is pretty common.
Yes, because they're the ones that are actually setting it up, right? How can we be responsible they're the ones that are setting it up. They're the ones that make sure it's ready to go. But it's up to us to make sure we follow the rules that go with that stage, whether it's capacity is typically one of the ones that's on the stage. And then obviously watercraft, watercraft need to be on proper watercraft policies. There's some exceptions. If you've got a little paddle boat, that would be fine. But again, there's the limitations. Non-motorized less than 16 meters, we can have. There is not, the exclusion does not apply to that. Next slide. Okay, so then we've got DNO, the directors and officers. I get a lot of questions on this, the directors and officers, and there's a little bit of confusion when we talk about what directors and officers coverage is, because often a claim will be brought forward and the club could be named, and possibly members of the board or non-members, but possibly Rotarians could be named. And I think when we hear that there's a claim that's naming someone or naming a board member, that we automatically go to the DNO or the directors and officers policy. That's not the case. And I'll get into why. If the claim is a bodily injury claim, it's always going to go back to the general liability policy. If you remember, section 1 is bodily injury. But this DNO policy, these are for the decisions made by the club. So it is a claims made policy. What that means is a general liability policy is an occurrence policy. It means it covers everything that occurred in that year. And then at the end of that year, we get a new policy. Claims made are DNO policies. What happens? Any claim that is made during that term is submitted. So we could have a DNO claim for an incident that happened 3 years ago, but the claim isn't brought forward until now. We would report it under the current DNO policy because the claim was made now. So we've got a $3 million policy limit with a deductible of $2,500. We've got extensions for employment practices. So I don't know if many of your clubs hire employees. Our club does. We do hire summer students. So you could have something like a wrongful dismissal or any sort of harassment, discrimination. These are the sort of claims you're going to find under DNO policy. Maybe you've got a situation, discrimination would be a key one under the directors and officers. You could have somebody who left the club because they felt they were discriminated on, or they didn't join the club, or they weren't promoted within the club. It'd be your DNO policy that would respond to this. So when you think of the directors and officers, think of the management decisions made by the club, not just the board. So financial decisions, anything from mismanagement of funds could be suggested, could be covered here. And the definition of insured, again, is very broad. So it's past members. You could have a claim that they're bringing in people that aren't even Rotarians anymore. That's still covered. You could have a claim where they're bringing in people's spouses because this person's just listing anybody they can think of. They're covered here. So the definition of insured includes volunteers, spouses, past members, estates of deceased members. So it's very broad coverage. Next slide. So the purpose of a directors and officers policy is to cover wrongful acts. Well, what is a wrongful act? So a breach of duty, negligence, a misstatement. So that would be an executive wrongful act. Employment practices, I referred to that just before. So discrimination, wrongful discipline. So maybe there's someone that you've had to talk to and say, I think this isn't the club for you. Invasion of privacy, harassment, humiliation. I don't think any club does this intentionally, but there's always, these situations do come up where people feel like that's the experience that they've had. So if that does happen, your policies do respond to protect you, to defend you if these situations come up. And then third-party employment practices. So this could be a claim brought forward from a customer, a service provider, another business person that the club deals. Next slide, Larry. Okay, so what is the main exclusions on a D&O policy? Well, some are obvious. Intentional, dishonest, fraudulent criminal acts. We don't want to cover that. You know, if somebody's doing something intentionally or criminally, that's not what our policy is there for. Our policy is always going to protect the entity. It's always going to protect the club. This is not intended to protect members that do criminal activity. The abuse policy is never going to defend the abuser. The D&O policy is never going to defend the criminal act, but it will defend and protect the club and the entity should they have to defend themselves for this member being part of the club or there's an association with the club. Other exclusions are exclusions like bodily injury. There's a pollution exclusion and auto exclusion. The reason why these are excluded is because there's proper insurance coverage elsewhere to address these concerns. And then the other main exclusion that's on a D&O policy is timing, meaning it's not within that policy term. It's not, the claim wasn't brought in during a time that you had the policy in force. So the exclusions typically make perfect sense. Next slide, Larry.
And before moving on, Rachel, when you talk about timing, it's not as if the claim has to be made in the year in which the incident took place if you're not aware of it. Just that they're not going to insure anything that took place before the policy came into effect. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I'm trying not to get into too much detail, but as questions come up, I can get into more detail. But absolutely. So the policy has to be enforced. So they had to be aware of the policy has to have been enforced at the time. Next slide. Crime coverage. So our crime coverage is very minimal. It is something we've talked about whether we need to increase or not. But at this point, we seem to be satisfied. We have an employee dishonesty claim, and we might all think, we're all such great people that follow the four-way test, service above self, and all that good stuff all the time. But the reality is, in the nonprofit world, we do see a certain amount of employee dishonesty or theft from the entity. So we have a limit up to $50,000. That's not a real high limit if you're a club that has a large bank account or fundraises a lot of money. When you have a lot of fundraisers, certainly if you're dealing with cash, but even if you're not, these incidents can happen. So we have up to 50,000 right now. Theft and robbery, burglary. Again, I'm thinking of our Rib Fest where we're doing cash runs all the time at any time. Some of this money could be taken off someone. Fraud, such as computer fraud, phishing, scams, we've got up to 25,000. And then some expenses related to crime to 10,000. So not a lot of coverage. If this is an exposure that your club has, we probably want to look at increasing limits, but we do have some low limits there. If something this comes up, if there's an incident, we can always talk about it and see how our policy can respond and if it can help. Next slide, Larry. Property coverage. Okay, again, this is one, we don't have a lot. There's not a lot of clubs that actually own a lot of property. Let's see. So again, there's the clubs, it's as per member certificate. So if your club actually owns some property, that will show on the binder that's sent to you. So our club really doesn't. But if you are a club, Campbellford Club out there, they've got some assets. They own a building. If you have a building, content equipment that requires insurance, we need to know about it because it's not necessarily, it's not going to be covered if we don't know about it. There's a $1,000 deductible, and we do have a floater of $2,500. So a property floater is a form of insurance when your property moves around, floats around in essence. So you might have a piece of equipment that you move around. Again, we should know about it. If you've got something like golf carts or something like that you've got some we should know about it to make sure that they're listed. But there is the option of having a floater type coverage for property of yours that moves around. You could have a ton of massive tents. Like when we look at that, the tent for the Whitby Club, I suspect that was a tent that they rent every year. But there is some clubs that may just own this stuff instead of renting it all the time. Some of those tents cost a lot. That should be on a floater. We should have the proper limits of that. If your club does that sort of thing, then you should let myself know. Next slide.
And we do have, this is an example where we do have several clubs that have chosen to purchase additional coverage to get higher property limits, because the small limits that we have in the generic policy aren't enough for them, and they pay a little bit higher premium for that. But that's okay. That's, as long as we know about it and we can arrange it, that's perfectly fine.
Exactly. Gaps. Okay, so what coverage don't we have that we need to be aware of? Currently, we do not purchase cyber. We've talked about it. If many of you are a business, I suggest you buy cyber coverage. As a club, we haven't yet. When we look at the cyber world right now, certainly in insurance, and we look at where most of the claims are, we kind of fall into two buckets typically. Extortion, or it's certainly one. I don't think we see a lot of that, where certainly we're not seeing it. But we're seeing that more in for-profit. We're seeing it in public sector, where basically someone shuts down your entire systems and lets you pay like a ransom for it. So we don't have that. The other major cost in the cyber world is just if your systems get shut down, or someone gets into your systems and locks them. There is a first party coverage just to get an IT person in to get that up and running, and they can be extensive costs. So we don't have that coverage. That is something that we talk about, but for the most part, a lot of the computers we use and equipment we use is owned by members. It's not, a lot of times it's not actually owned by the clubs or the district. So it really isn't a district or Rotary expense. But again, that's something that we'll try to stay on top of it and year to year revisit that. We do not have an umbrella or an excess policy. So those that are not in the insurance world, all that is additional liability limits. So the limits that we have, no, we don't have data privacy loss for a cyber claim. That's not something we have right now. So those are additional limits. We do not have additional limits. So the limits we have are the limits we have, which is 5 million on our general liability, which is our main exposure, bodily injury. We don't have pollution coverage, so we don't really have any huge pollution exposures. But again, you've got to look within your club. If your club is dealing with chemicals, if your club is doing anything out in nature where you feel that you could be disturbing things, like these are, if you've got any sort of inkling that you need a different coverage, then you should be setting up a call with me, and we can go through it. We can go through what the exposures are, and if we need to add a different coverage, we will. Is that the last slide, Larry?
Yes.
Okay, so now I know that's a lot of content. And if you're still awake, I'm happy to take questions from anybody on, I can tell you some of the main questions we get. The main questions I get all the time are from directors and officers that are concerned what the coverage is. And most of them are concerned that the limits aren't high enough because the limits are only 3 million. And when I ask them what is the risk they're most concerned about getting paid under the D&O policy, it's usually a bodily injury. Not usually, it's always a bodily injury, which is actually a 5 million limit. So I just wanted to mention that because I know that there is always confusion with that. John?
Question, you mentioned Interact and Rotaract.
Yep.
We have 2 of each. My club fees, do you know that? And you charge me extra to cover that off? How does that work?
Do you want to take that one, Larry?
Interact and Rotaract are covered under our policy.
Do you charge me extra because I have 4 of these things?
Rotaract clubs now they pay their own premiums, or the sponsor club pays the premiums for them, as the case may be.
So they're a club in their own entity, in their own right then.
And
Okay.
that happened a couple of years ago when the status of Rotaract was elevated, but there is no additional premium for Interact clubs.
Okay.
Right.
thanks.
So John, prior to, like what Larry's saying is they're paying their own way now, but prior to that, everybody paid the same. Your club wasn't financially penalized because you were supporting Interact or Rotaract. Every member pays the same amount. If your club pays more, it's because your club has more members. Randy.
I've seen at events somebody, or one event in particular, where they said it was an age of majority event, and I don't know if that's a thing, but is that connected to insurance, or is it a thing? Do you know the answer to that?
Event.
It had to do with serving alcohol, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess that would be an individual decision by the club, probably to do with their smart serve, that they don't want anyone younger. It's certainly never an insurance requirement. Your insurance is never going to give you an issue because you've got, you have an event that has, it's not an insurance issue. There's no exclusion saying that you can't have underage people. There's an expectation that you're going to mitigate that with either security or wristbands or all that good stuff, but it's not a restriction, and it's not going to prevent you from getting coverage if somebody makes a mistake.
Thank you.
I think there was another question in the chat.
Talked about
the historical claims ratio. Yes, our limits are definitely sufficient. When we look at the loss run that we've had over the last 20 years, we've never had a claim. The largest claim we had was a couple $100,000, didn't even get over 300,000, and that was a one-off. And so 5 million I think is more than enough. Could you please send a copy of your insurance? Yeah, you betcha, Peter. And I think Larry posted online. Last time we had it posted, the one from 2 years ago, if you want to compare which one was better, and waste your time watching this twice, you can do that. I think it's still on the website.
Randy.
Yeah, and I think you've answered this, and it's pretty straight, but anyhow, I'm going to ask it. Every now and then, something will come up where and somebody will say, well, we have to, okay, let me just think of an example. We have a waterfalls event. People have to walk down this pretty steep hill. Pardon me?
Like a hike or something?
Yeah, short hike. And then and so it's a steep ground, and so anyhow we got them down. But we also, some people have mobility issues, and then we do have an ATV there, and so we said, well, why aren't we helping these people put them in the ATV and take them up and down? And then somebody said, well, we've got people walking. We don't want to take the risk of there'll be liability. And in my head, I think, well, that's why we have insurance. Am I being too simplistic?
No, not at all. So it's that fine line, right? So I agree with you, Larry, in the sense that we have insurance for a reason. So I encourage you to have comfort in doing activities that there is coverage for it, but there's still a an expectation that we're being responsible, right? So
yeah, of course.
Absolutely. If you've got people, let's back up and talk about this walk/hike where there could be issues. The main thing is anyone that's going on this, we don't have coverage like participants coverage. So you arrange this hike, we're going to look at waterfalls, we're going to climb through this hole and up this, and we're going to do all this crazy stuff. And it's no different than if you want to go downhill skiing and you sign a waiver. We don't necessarily sign waivers for all this stuff, but if you're participating in something and you trip over something and you hurt yourself on it, you could sue the club, but and we would have that up to 50,000 medical. But ultimately, if somebody injured themselves on a tour or a walk or something fun that we're doing, they would have to prove we were liable. So if they want to sue us, we'd have bodily injury coverage, but they would have to prove that we are reliable. So we're not, subject to that 50,000 that we have that we could.
And if I may interrupt for a second, when you say prove we're liable, and that would mean somehow negligence or
Yeah, something
lack
we
of
did.
due care.
You absolutely right. So that duty of care to make sure that we provided them a space that was safe, all that good stuff. Let's say that they said that we did something maybe reckless, innocently enough. Maybe we didn't check out the walk ahead of time, and had we checked it out ahead of time, we would have realized it was a bit too slippery to be having an event like that. So we do have coverage for that, but it would only respond like we would have to be like a legal claim put against us. We can't just settle it, but there is coverage for that. Yeah, it's not like a participant's coverage.
Thank you.
And it's not for Rotarians. So if a Rotarian falls and hurts themselves, they're considered an insured on their policy. An insured can't sue the club and say, we went for this tour, I broke my leg on the tour, and I want the club's policy to respond to it. That's not happening. And they can't even cover that 50,000 medical expenses. So yeah, if that makes sense. It's not an accident policy. Gil?
Yeah, hi. Our club supports a police division with a picnic and other events, and it includes a bouncy castle. I think all we do is write the check. We don't hire the castle or anything like that. Do we have any exposure there?
Sure do. So the thing you need with that, Gil, is you need to make sure that they are providing, so anything that's bouncy, any air things, like we don't have coverage for that. It is an exclusion. So you need to make sure that they provide a copy of their insurance listing the agent court club as an additional insured. So let's say a child bounces off the castle, bangs their head, injures himself, sends a letter to the agent court Rotary saying, hey, you guys are responsible. All you would need to do is provide a copy of the certificate of insurance that the bouncy castle guy gave you. Give that to your insurance people. They're going to sort it out with them now, their insurance. It's not going to show up as a claim for you. We don't have to worry about a denial, but now we've got their insurance that will handle it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
And again, that's a fairly common situation, Gil, because bouncy castle exclusions, I think, are pretty common in a lot of policies. So again, companies that are in the business of providing them recognize that here's my bouncy castle, here's my certificate of insurance. They're accustomed to doing it, so it's not something that's going to surprise them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's all the more reason, requesting these certificates from the partners we work with are important. We get in a real good habit or bad habit of when we do business with people, let's have an event with the town, or we rent a space somewhere, and they ask us, we need a certificate of insurance and we need you to add the town. We take care of it right away. We make sure that we get that for them. We don't always do the same thing. So we're really good at handing people certificates of insurance. We're not so good at saying, no, wait a second, like we're running this event. You're a vendor at our event. We need you to have a certificate of insurance. Our policy is never intended to pick up the activities of other people that are not Rotary events or Rotary vendors.
No.
Yeah, I'm looking at a situation where we have sponsored an event, and we've been marked as Rotary, with club sponsoring, 20% or 50% of the cost. Should we be worried about insurance?
So you sponsored it?
Yeah.
But you're not involved in the operation or the planning or anything else?
No. But it's marketed that, we are a sponsor.
I wouldn't be, but you can always ask for a certificate of insurance, like naming you. And all that says is for this particular event that they're having, they're responsible for everything to do with it, that you've got no responsibility. It doesn't hurt, or even just asking that they have proof of insurance, but just as a sponsor, that wouldn't be excluded under our policy. So let's say you were dragged into it. I have no concern that our policy, the district policy, is going to reject that claim. They're still going to investigate it. They're still going to defend you. They ultimately would probably work with whoever this event was that you sponsored and establish liability, but our policy would still respond.
As a practical matter, Rachel, your clubs run a rib fest for many years, lots of sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
Has any sponsor requested a certificate of insurance from you?
No.
Yeah. So probably not, Kamal. I wouldn't, if you're clearly just a sponsor and you're not involved in actually running the program or the event, you're probably fine.
No,
Yeah,
it's
but,
yes.
But these are all
Yeah,
good questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you worry about something like food poisoning that happens or something like that to a family, and something serious happens, and then what do? You're a sponsor,
Well,
you've been named.
and I get that because if they see your name, somebody comes to RibFest, they don't know it's Rotary, but they see your business's name or your club's name really big there. You could be pulled into it. Our policies has no exclusion for that. Our policy would respond that we would hand that over to our insurance people to sort out the liability. Hopefully they would quickly identify there's no exposure. But that's not for us. The policy would respond, the policy would defend us.
As Rachel was saying, we can't eliminate risk, so that's not a standard we should expect to strive for. But it is important to sort of talk through all these kind of scenarios so that, I mean, as we are looking at getting involved in events that do have risk, whatever that risk may be, that we are sensitive to the fact that, oh, we need to consider, the risk management dimensions of whatever this issue is, which will often include, are there any insurance considerations, exclusions that we ought to be aware of? And that's where we, and Rachel in particular, can provide you with guidance on something like that. And by all means, we encourage you to take advantage of that. Kamel.
Yeah. My question is more about waivers. Rachel mentioned earlier on about skiing, they asked us to sign waivers. Do we have to have a standard document to ask people to sign, or we don't do that at all?
Our coverage is going to respond whether we do that or not. That's good risk control. So if you have an event that you feel like you need to, I don't think any of our clubs are doing anything that was probably be high risk or probably not doing anyway. But if you are, then we can certainly talk about waivers, and I probably have some draft ones I can help share. Our highest risk event has always been RibFest. We would never have a waiver going into a RibFest. Waivers are typically if it's some sort of physical activity, sporting activity, those sort of things. So our club doesn't use any, but it doesn't mean, they are a good idea if there's some sort of physical activity.
Yeah, I'm just talking about hikes and walks and, talking about the environment.
It doesn't hurt. Like it doesn't hurt. If you're going, I think that what I like most about waivers is just this understanding that they're taking some personal responsibility.
Yes.
So if you're doing that, I can share a couple standard waivers that you guys can tweak to make it more, appropriate for whatever event you're doing. But they're not a bad idea. They don't hold up in court, but it's still an acceptance that it often slows people down from claiming because they feel a personal responsibility.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Is that they take responsibility before even they decide to pursue a legal issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Rachel, thank you for doing this again. And thank you all for the questions you've provided. This recording will be made available, and I'm happy to share the slides with those who are here. And I'm hoping that this, again, will raise the level of awareness of risk management when you're considering doing programs and events, not to make you paranoid, but to make you sensitive to the fact that risk management is an important aspect to consider when we're looking at doing things. but the insurance is there to protect us. And if there's issues that arise with events that you think you may require a certificate of insurance from third parties, or if you have more significant assets, more than the rather small amount that is covered by our policy, to let us know that too, so that we can arrange for additional coverage for that through our existing policy.
Well, he's got a heater, right?
Larry, maybe can we take this minute just if you go onto the district page and you search insurance, our insurance policy documents are online. There's a link that tells you the instructions on how to request a certificate of insurance. So a lot of that's there. I have a peek. It saves everybody sending their certificate requests to me because I really don't have the time to do that. But I definitely will make time for insurance questions or scenarios. But if you need just a basic certificate request, all that's really easily explained on our website, and the policy documents are there. And the last video that was exactly like this one is on there as well. Randy? You're on mute. Randy's buying us all beers. No, you're still on mute. Maybe he's going to chat it to us.
Okay, got it.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so something Larry just mentioned got me a little off track when he said being aware of risk. Okay, once again, maybe I'm too simplistic, but my understanding of things that are kind of normal things that we do, as long as we are doing things with due diligence and following any laws, but not just laws, but due diligence, we shouldn't be afraid to do it because we do have insurance. Is the way I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Like, we encourage you to have fun activities and to do a lot of great things and have peace of mind knowing that coverage is in place. But if there's anything that you think is maybe slightly outside the box, it's always better to just double check. Certainly the policy docs that are posted, I don't expect everybody to know how to read policy documents because they are insurance. But shoot me an email or set up a call. I'm happy to go through it with you. All your clubs do have liquor liability coverage. So liquor liability is the main one. Liquor liability coverage, though, is covered for only two things. If it's a fundraising event or a club social event. I think that's all the main reason why we do it, right? Like Rib Fest, it's a fundraising event. Maybe we have an evening meeting where it's a social event. I will point out one exception, like that's come to our club. Our club has been known as, oh, they've got Smart Serve. Let's see if they can run the bar for us. Well, if it's not our fundraising event and it's not our social event, then it's not our event. Our coverage doesn't apply. So our club once did run the bar for Town of Newcastle 100-year celebrations. We made sure they got the liquor license, they got the insurance policy, because it was their event. We were just helping them out, but we weren't making any money. It wasn't fundraising for us, and it wasn't social for us. So that was a situation we made sure they got the insurance.
But what does that cover?
That would be we overserved someone.
And the related problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Rachel.
Sure.
We put on an annual Scotch tasting event at a golf club. We buy the Scotch, but their staff do the portion control and serve it to all the people during the dinner. In the past, we've never taken out any additional insurance. Is that required?
Nope, you're all good.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a social and or a fundraising event. Not to mention, you're not doing the Smart Serve. You've got somebody else taking care of that. You might want to make sure they have insurance, but I'm sure they do. But you could, if you want to be that extra mile diligent, you could say, "Can you give me proof of insurance? So you have insurance in place." But I suspect they do.
Okay, thank you.
Something I just wanted to throw in, and it just occurred to me over the course of that conversation. Many of our clubs have their own foundations, charitable trusts, call it what you will. They have different names, and they're often separate legal entities. So the club may be incorporated as an entity, the foundation or charitable trust may be incorporated as an entity. And our insurer has made it clear that, I mean, the foundation or the charitable trust will be insured under the policy, but only if it is completely controlled by the Rotary Club. So, because there are some organizations that choose to say, well, I mean, there should be a bit of an arm's length relationship between the club and its foundation. They may want to bring in outside directors, for example, to help manage the foundation. It's got a bit of a different skill set. Don't do that. And really, if we want to make sure that any activity that is run through your foundation or charitable trust is going to be insured under our policy, it needs to be like joined at the hip with the club. So ideally, the board of directors that you have for the club is also the board of directors you have for the foundation, or if not, make sure that your foundation, that all of the board members of the foundation are members of the Rotary Club, to make sure that it's going to be covered too.
Yes, exactly. He doesn't normally do that. Thanks, Larry, for the invite. I think everyone has my contact information. You can find me at Club Runner, Rachel Boyd, Rotary Club of Bowmanville. Don't hesitate to reach out.
And thank you all. Go
Thank
Canada,
you.
go.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Larry, for putting this on. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Good job.